June 6, 2018 meeting. Have a gavel. Call to order the June 6, 2018 meeting of the Quincy Conservation Commission. We will defer the minutes till next meeting. And we'll start with, first matter on the agenda is, we may come a little out of order tonight, but the first matter on the agenda is 121 Edgewater Drive. Notice of intent filed by Morgan Aronoff, proposing demolition and rebuild a single-family home. Resource area bordering land subject to flooding, isolated land subject to flooding, and land subject to coastal storm flowage. Okay, who's here for the applicant? Okay. Please state your name and address.
Morgan Aronoff, 121 Edgewater Drive, Quincy, Mass.
Okay. And maybe your plans, what are you proposing to do? Completely demolish the existing home?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Small house, I'm trying to make it into a medium.
Now, for the record, did you give notice to the abutters? Have you turned in your
Yes.
green cards?
I did not, I have it all.
Okay.
Here, I sold the previous.
Yes. You can give this to me. Okay, and on your plan, the existing dwelling, are you changing the footprint?
No.
So it's
Moving it a foot and a half away from the neighbor, just to get a little more relief and be code compliant, feel compliant.
But as far as the resource area being, the movement doesn't seem to affect it.
It's very, very minor, so position change.
It's just, it's not a wetlands here, it's just land subject to flooding. So what is the foundation?
It's going to be a spread footing.
Flow through?
Yes.
Okay. And who's your contractor?
JWF building.
So I don't see foundation.
John
plans here.
Froelich. I have here.
Okay, you have the foundation plan showing the flow through?
I don't know what has the, that'll probably be on the next
And
set.
that'd be a,
That'll be on the next set, I would
okay,
imagine.
any questions from the board? Any comments or questions from neighbors or? Okay, pretty straightforward. We have some drawings, but we don't have the foundation drawing, so it's going to be a requirement that obviously this has to be a flow through because it's subject to coastal storm flowage. You don't have those here today, do you?
I can take a look. I know I have a foundation plan here on this plan. I just don't know if the flow through what you're asking for should. It's more.
I mean, that's a condition, so.
All right, I can get that.
Are we prepared to proceed with the condition of the drawings for the foundation?
Yeah.
Any other motion? No, second. Is there a motion? I can't accept the motion. Oh, you made the motion?
Yeah.
For conditions with the.
Subject to presentation of your drawings. Okay, we need to see the flow through.
Okay, and we expect to bring those to the building department or bring?
Yeah, building department is
And a
fine.
copy to the conservation.
Oh, same.
Yeah.
All right?
Okay.
Okay, all in favor? Aye. Okay. You may proceed. The second matter is 53 Post Island Road. Request for determination of applicability filed by Kenneth Kahn, The applicant proposes demolition of existing single-family home and replaced with a new single-family. Land subject to coastal storm flowage. That's what Queen does.
My name is Patrick Rowan-Gray. I'm a local civil engineer and land surveyor in an office in Quincy. And this is the property owner at 53 Post Island Road. His name is Kenneth Cann, and his wife is sitting back there. His property was damaged with the recent storm. We've got approximately 2 to 3 feet of water on the first floor. And he's got to demolish the house. He had to move out, and he's going to rebuild. So we do have a plan showing the new building. New building is slightly bigger than the old building.
Forty-nine is a different one. It's 49 is Steve Sweeney. Okay.
Right next door.
So in this area, the 100-year flood is elevation 8. The average ground elevation is elevation 8, and the 100-year storm elevation is elevation 12. And the town that I'd like him to go up to elevation 13. He's decided to go to elevation 17 with the first floor, so we can park a car underneath. The plot plan shows access to the house for the 2 cars underneath, and the access is going to be permeable pavers. There is an existing driveway to the right of the house, which for now is going to stay.
Is that a shared driveway with, it looks like it goes over on 49?
Yes. But the
Or is
neighbor,
it a person?
actually, I think the neighbor's coming before you.
Yes, we'll do that one next.
I don't think he uses it, even though it is a shared driveway. I don't think he parks. The neighbor doesn't park behind the house, as far as I know. We kept the height of the building below the 35 feet requirement. It's set at 34'6". Basically, the house is in the same footprint, except he's making it a little larger at the rear. That's about it.
And the only resource area we're affecting is land subject to coastal storm flowage. And that's what affected you, coastal storm flowage. So that's flow through.
Yes, it shows on the house elevation.
I think this is rebuilt for its request for RDA's property.
Yeah, which is the and of course with the house,
Okay. Any questions from the board? Any comments from neighbors, as I know that?
Thank you. Good evening. Margaret Forrest, 36 Rock Island Road. There's a lot of neighbors here for both this and your next application. I just wanted them to please stand and be recognized in support of the Cox application.
Okay.
Just to save you them coming up, but we do have a lot of neighborhood support, so
Thank you.
thank you.
Any other comments? All right. This is an RDA, so motion that is not applied.
Make the motion that the act is not applied.
All in favor?
Thank you.
Thank you very much. So we'll jump ahead to 49 Post Island Road, the neighbors, filed by Steve Sweeney.
Good evening. Margaret LaForest again here in representation of your applicant, Mr. Steve Sweeney. I'm here as a volunteer, as a friend, and as a neighbor. to present before you. Very similar to the RDA application that you just heard, this property too was affected by the March 2nd storm. It has also received a substantial damage letter by Institutional Services Director Duca. It does have the entitlement to construct, rebuild on the same footprint. This footprint is actually being reduced. You do have before you the foundation plan. The decision has been made not to file a zoning application. This will be parking with 1.5 stories over. It's a very, very modest home. And again, if I could just ask the neighbors who are all here to stand and show, there's a lot of support for this application. This neighborhood is not just neighbors and friends, but they are truly a family. So all in favor of the Sweeney application to rebuild. They miss him in the neighborhood, I have to tell you. So we are asking for a negative determination.
And the other resource area is again,
Coastal flood.
which is unfortunately we know. Okay. Any questions? Any other comments? Is there a
We
motion?
have a letter of support as well.
Okay,
Okay,
motion.
pass it in, but I think.
I'll make a motion, the act doesn't apply.
Second.
All in favor?
Thank you.
Thank you. Well, I wonder if there's any more from, the next matter is 55 Franklin Ave. It's 55 Franklin Ave here, it's filed by Daniel Montiero, proposing demolition of existing single-family home replaced with a new single-family home. Land subject to coastal storm flow. So we're yes, doesn't have a regular. Okay.
Me again, I'm Patrick Rosengraver, civil engineer and land surveyor with an office in Quincy. And this is the home of Daniel Montiero and his wife, Julia, this is another tear down. He bought this house recently, newly married couple, and it's in the floodplain. And it's much too expensive to raise the house. It's just cheaper for him to knock it down and start again. So the 100-year floodplain in this area is elevation 11. His average ground elevation is elevation 6. So he's got to go up a minimum of 11 feet. The town wanted to go up an extra foot, so he's going from 6 to 12. He's volunteered to go up another foot, so he's going from 6 to 13. So we can park one car underneath. The proposed parking is shown as permeable pavers to allow the water to go through. And the foundation will have breakthrough side windows as required. The height of the building will be under 35 feet, 34 feet 11, just meets it by 1 inch. He has talked to the neighbours, and 4 of his immediate abutters, people who touch his property, have written a letter of approval. There is a 5th neighbour that he has not been able to contact. Anytime he goes to the door, they're not home. So he has the immediate approval of 4 of his immediate abutters.
Did you give the green cards to?
Yes.
Okay.
I have them.
Okay, thank you.
I think that's our only couple. We can need those for the zoning board.
Oh, okay, yeah, because I was just gonna say, you're getting closer to the side, you're gonna next appear before the zoning board.
That is correct. If we can get copies of those, for the zoning board.
Of the letters?
Yeah, they're gonna need the same, those for the zoning board, so. Can you make copies and submit them to
Yes.
us? Okay, so
You can email me, and remind me tomorrow, and I'll make them in the office.
Okay.
Okay.
Yeah, because I'm seeing the existing foundation is a lot smaller. But you're gonna raise up assuming that all the resources goes to storm flowage. You know, we're not worried about permeable space, because during a storm, it doesn't matter. Was this damaged in the last?
No, no, it wasn't. Current Hurricane Riley, Quinn, and Skylar, there was no damage.
But your next stop would be the zoning board, because you are expanding the footprint significantly. Any questions from the board? And we've got some letters. For any other questions or comments from neighbors? The main issue is going to be zoning. I think you've got the flow through. So we have, this is RDA. Yes. It's appropriate for RDA.
I would I'd make a motion that the act is not applicable, but that we clear it at the zoning board.
Yes, oh yeah. Just
Okay.
Second?
Second.
All in favor?
Thank you.
Next matter is 12 Lee Street, request for determination of applicability. Proposes to raise existing house and build up the existing foundation to support the house at new elevation. And that is. Do you have everything? Okay.
Hi. We just would like to lift the house to flood elevation
Yeah.
on the existing foundation with concrete. Fill it in and make a flow through.
And what is existing foundation now?
Cinder blocks, and then there's a concrete ledge, and then there's 2 rows of cinder blocks on top of that they're gonna take off and tie into the ledge.
Because the resource area is, land subject to coastal storm flow, so that will be an improvement.
Yes.
And you're not changing the footprint?
No.
Any questions from the board? Any neighbors' comments? Did you hand in your green cards, okay? Did you get it? Or you had it?
Oh, we had a comment out here.
Okay, oh,
Well, I'm
sorry.
in agreement, I'm on a bottom, my name is Kate Healy, I live at 46 Middle Street, Braintree, and I would be the butter to the right and the left.
Okay,
I'm in favor of it.
okay,
Hopefully it works out well.
thank you. Okay. We have a motion? Motion on this, RDA?
I'll make the motion, the act is not applicable.
Second.
Second.
Okay, all in favor? Okay. The next matter is Commander Shea Boulevard Extension, amended order of conditions, filed by the City of Quincy, proposing revisions to existing order of conditions per plans provided. Resource areas bordering vegetated wetlands, land subject to coastal storm flow. Or is this,
For the record, my name is Bill Marr with Murphy Engineering, and I'm not sure if there's been a little bit of confusion on this, but I had filed a certificate of compliance for this project. We had appeared before the Conservation Commission back in 2014, received an order of conditions. We were before the commission, or I was before the commission last December to ask for a 6-month extension, which ended on Sunday. We filed a certificate of compliance on last week that the project's been completed. The building improvements as well as the parking lot improvements 500 Community Street Boulevard.
So we're just amending it to extend the time so that your your compliance falls within the requirement.
Well, I'm looking to close out the project with the
Right,
certificate
right.
of compliance. So the extension order is over by 3 days. It expired on June 3rd, which is Sunday. But I filed the certificate of compliance last week. So I'm just looking to close out the project and have a certificate of compliance issued for the project.
You're not changing anything,
No.
you're just extending it.
Well, extended only in purpose of closing it.
Yeah.
Right.
So that's what should be. Its project is complete?
It's complete, he's certifying that it is, obviously we should send somebody down to have a look and we can take care of the rest of this administratively in the office, if the commission is okay.
All right, then, a
Right,
motion.
well, one thing, just like to say, the site is stabilized, it is functioning, everything that we had installed, with some rain gardens and, the closed drainage system for what we have, and the water quality systems and so forth, so it seems to be operating, according to expectations.
If you want to set up a meeting to review it,
Sure.
when can you do it?
What would you like to do? What is that?
As long as you're-
I'd like to do it tomorrow and get it off the records. Or Friday, I mean, whatever's best.
Okay.
We can do-
Either day is fine with me. Preferably,
John,
any time tomorrow I'm available, Friday morning.
Friday AM sounds good.
I'm
What
sorry?
time?
I'm sorry, Friday,
What time?
on Friday,
Yep,
8 AM,
all right. And where would you like to meet?
right at the site, 500 Community Street Boulevard?
500?
Yes.
Okay. You take care of it?
Yep.
Okay. Can we have a vote to, I guess, formally extend it so that they can file their certificate of compliance, subject to your inspection?
I have comments before you vote.
Oh, I'm sorry, any comments?
So, my name's Eric Salmon, 90 Quincy Shore Drive. I don't think they should be given an extension. They've been terrible neighbors. We don't want the FedEx building at all. You know, they've gone out of their way to exclude the community in their development, and I don't see any purpose to give them an extension or do the Commander Shea Boulevard extension if the committee's not gonna stop people from literally filling in the Ponce River, then I don't understand really what would happen to commission, so.
There's some other projects that are coming up and have come up, but this one is complete, at least under this roof. So
This
there's,
is the existing Boston Scientific property. It's been in operation for a number of years. We didn't do any filling in.
this isn't the same extension that was before us a little while ago. This is for the completion of a 2014 order.
2014 order that they're getting around to now and want to extend it. Like, so to me, you know, again, terrible neighbors, I wouldn't give them the extension. I'll throw them out of Quincy for all I care at this point.
But administratively, they do want to file their certificate of compliance and.
Which we have.
Yeah, okay, and we would just formally approve it.
It's a little too late to me, but
But I understand, thank you.
it's 2018, now it's 2014, what have they done for 4 years, except for be terrible neighbors? Sell us out to FedEx, it's the scumbags that's gonna.
Okay, thank you. Do I need a vote on this?
Do we need a vote for amending or just?
Yeah, just to amend
Okay,
extension so they can file their, so that
I'll make
there's.
the motion, we vote to amend.
Okay. Second?
Second.
Subject to your final inspection.
Yep,
David?
do that Friday morning at 8 AM.
Yes. And I'm sorry, your name?
John.
John. I'll see you there.
Yep.
All right, thank you.
All right, and then the final matter is the Long Island Ridge, Moon Island, notice of intent filed by the city of Boston. applicant is proposing to replace the superstructure of the Long Island Bridge between Moon Island and Long Island. The portion of the project in Quincy involves placing new bridge spans over existing piers and improving the bridge stormwater system. Resource areas are coastal beaches, coastal banks, land subject to coastal storm flow.
And I'm going to make an announcement that I am recusing. I am not going to get involved in this vote, and I'm actually going to sit in the audience.
Do we have green cards for?
Thank you.
Good evening, members of the commission. My name is Chris Osgood. I serve as Mayor Walsh's Chief of Streets in the City of Boston. It's a pleasure to be before you tonight. Thank you very much for the opportunity. As you know, my team and I are here to present our notice of intent for the reconstruction of the Long Island Bridge and secret payment for of it. In January 1st of this year, as you know, Mayor Walsh made an announcement that we plan on reactivating and reopening a recovery campus on Long Island as a way of expanding the region's continuum of care and addressing the opioid crisis that we're all facing. As part of that reopening of the recovery campus is the reconstruction of the Long Island Bridge. In a moment, we'll hear from our partners in this effort. We've taken great lengths in our plans around the means and methods of construction to minimize any environmental impacts. And I will turn it over to Mark Ennis and Sam Moffett from STD and from TRC respectively. We'll go through what we've done in terms of means and methods of construction and the steps that we've taken really to address those things which are really important to the Weapons Act. Let's hear it. Sam.
Thank you for the opportunity of presenting this project to you this evening. My name is Mark Ennis. I'm with STV Incorporated, and for this project I am the design lead. Also on our team is Sam Moffett, who is leading the permitting effort, and Sam is with TRC Solutions. Also from the design team here is Nicole Bulger, who is the civil lead, and we have Dan Hertzinger, also of TRC. So with your permission, we'd like to do a brief presentation on the project. And we have a slideshow set up here. So the objectives of the project that we've been tasked with is to develop a structure that minimizes wetland impacts and indeed minimizes construction impacts in general in the surrounding community. Also, our goal is to improve the stormwater performance from what was in place in the old structure and to provide a structure that will serve for a minimum of 75 years. And finally, to provide a structure that improves resiliency compared to the structure that was in place previously. To this aim, we've developed a superstructure replacement that will match the original structure in many ways. It will have the same width of deck. It will have the same roadway profile. And when we say roadway profile, we refer to the height of the roadway. So across the bridge, the roadway elevation at all points will match the elevation of the roadway that was in place when the previous bridge was in service. Over many of the spans, we will be providing increased clearance over the water. As mentioned, we will be improving the stormwater management. We'll be minimizing coastal wetlands impacts through the construction, through construction methods that we will outline tonight. And we will also meet all U.S. Coast Guard permitting requirements for the bridge. And finally, we will provide improvements to the resiliency of the structure. Two renderings here. In reality, the top left-hand view is a photograph of the old bridge people might recognize. This is taken from the Long Island side. So Long Island is in the foreground and Moon Island is in the distance. And you might recognize the old truss span pointed out. Thank you.
Everyone's awake.
So this is the designated navigation span here with the through truss configuration that maximizes clearance for vessels passing below. And we replicate that approach with a through truss here. And it's at this identical location as the original bridge. So this is the proposed bridge down here, and this is the existing. And the intent of this structure is to reuse the existing piers. And in that way, it helps minimize impacts to the seabed. Sam will speak a little bit more specifically.
Sure. Thank you very much, Mark. Once again, for the record, my name is Sam Moffett. I'm with TRC. Thank you very much for the opportunity to speak to you tonight. This first image here that we're sharing with you, it appears in the notice of intent that we filed with you. And this is the portion of the bridge structure out in the harbor, away from the shore. And you can see perhaps on the right-hand side there, it's depicted the municipal boundary line between Boston and Quincy, just to orient everybody to what we're looking at in this image here. And what we have proposed is construction methodology whereby the bridge spans will be floated into place. And what we have presented in the notice of intent, because of that proposed construction methodology, is zero impacts to wetland jurisdictional areas. In this area would be land under the ocean. And so the punchline from this slide is that for this portion of the bridge, which is well over half, more like 75% of the project in Quincy, there are zero wetland impacts proposed. And with that, I'm going to hand it back to Mark to talk about the near shore area.
To achieve zero impacts, the methodology of construction is laid out here on this slide. And what we're proposing to do here, you see 4 different stages here in the installation of the bridge structure over these 3 spans. We start off with the pier structures, which will be reinforced as a first step. And then sequentially, the spans will be floated in by barge. And as the tide drops, the spans will be dropped into place. This is the same mechanism that was used for folk who might be familiar with the Four River Bridge here in Quincy. When they installed the main lift span, that was the identical mechanism they used. They floated out the main lift span, which is significantly longer than the span shown here. They floated it out by barge, maneuvered it into place, and as the tide dropped, the bridge dropped onto its bearings. And it's that same mechanism that will be replicated here on the Long Island Bridge. So the first step, as shown here, we would float in 1 span with a slight cantilever. We would come over and do 2 spans over with a slight cantilever. And then with these 2 structures in place on either side, we will place strand jacks, and these are basically temporary jacking systems. And we will float in the middle span, and they will be attached to the strands and pulled up into place and connected to form the structure through these span areas. And in this way, by just using the barge, we do not impact the seabed. Is there another slide? I had mentioned that the intent is to reinforce the existing pier structures, and this slide lays out how that work will progress. Shown here is the existing pier structure, which is typical of the piers throughout the bridge. We have this part here is the stem, and it's a granite-clad concrete structure. So we have granite stone facing on either side, and down the middle is concrete. And across the top is a masonry cap about 2 foot in depth. That sits on a foundation pad, and that in turn sits on a tremipore. Some of these tremipores in turn are supported by timber piles. Others sit directly on grade in a spread footing type foundation condition. Our proposal is that we will come in and work from the top side. We will remove the granite cap pieces. Once removed, we will drill down post-tensioning ducts down into the tremi concrete. We will place post-tensioning bars, and through the action of post-tensioning, we will also pour a concrete cap, I should say, which will be 4 feet in height, which will bring up the top elevation of the piers approximately 2 feet in each case. And then once that concrete is set, we will tension the post-tensioning bars so that the new concrete cap, the concrete stem, the concrete foundation, and the tremmy concrete are locked together.
Thank you very much, Mark. So this next slide shows the nearshore area, the approach, and what we are showing here is Moon Island Head in this area right here. This is the Long Island access roadway. The Boston Fire Department Training Academy is down here. This is just to orient people on where we are. And my colleague Dan Hertzlinger here is a professional wetland scientist, performed a wetland delineation that forms the basis of our alteration calculations that we presented in the NOI. And what we have identified here in this area is there's land under the ocean, obviously. There's coastal beach, there's coastal bank, and there is land subject to coastal storm flowage. And this line right here delineates the edge of the coastal storm area of coastal storm flowage. This line delineates the edge of the bank, the bank, and this delineates the edge of the beach. And what we have proposed for the construction, which Mark will describe to you in a minute, is a methodology that will not require very much footprint at all, de minimis footprint in resource areas under this board's jurisdiction. And that is because what we are proposing is to move the approach stand into place through a maneuver called a launch. So the final span from the abutment out to Pier 1 will be launched from the water towards the shore. This will require the use of cranes and some other equipment, but what we have showed here is two things. One is using the what we call Pier 1 and the former bridge had an abutment, and then very close into the abutment there was a pier, which we have been referring to as Pier 1, and the foundation of that pier is still in existence. There's a concrete slab of grade, and what we are proposing is to make use of that concrete slab to temporarily place a support structure on top of that concrete slab that would help facilitate the movement of the span across the space. And at the end of the work, that would be removed from the field, and the concrete slab that was the foundation of Pier 1 will remain and be abandoned in place. We are also proposing a set of 4 pipe piles to support another potential support structure, trestle structure that would be in the coastal beach area, and that would require driving 4 pipe piles at the 4 corners, and the total impact associated with that temporary impact of driving pipe piles is, as we say in the NOI, is approximately 80 square feet. So it's a really, really minimal impact, and that's by intention and design. We understand the significance, the importance of the wetland resources under your jurisdiction, and we have gone to great lengths to avoid impacting them even temporarily. So that is, I think, what I would like to say on that. Item back to Mark.
Thank you. Just before moving on, Dan, just thank you, Sam. Just to emphasize, the area that you do see in green here, that is just repaving. So that is just a repaving exercise for that small piece.
And it's in buffer zone. It's not the source area.
So it's a very small footprint, and it's in the buffer zone, not in the resource areas. So we say that just to emphasize how light our footprint here is on in the wetland areas. And to achieve the method of construction Sam just described, if we could move to the next slide. So This basically reflects the logic that Sam just explained. As we get close to the shoreline, we lose the opportunity to use barges because the depth of the water isn't available that we can float in the stands like we had shown in the other slide. So we revert to a different mechanism, again with the goal of minimizing our footprint on the sensitive shoreline areas. So what we are proposing to do is take advantage of the foundation of the existing pier that's shown here, as I tried to highlight it here, and use that as a support. Then construct another temporary support adjacent to that, approximately midway to the first pier. And that support there consists of 4 concrete, steel columns that are located in plan view, as you see here. So there's 1, 2, 3, 4, and that basically forms a table for an additional support point. So using the pier and this temporary support location, we can install the structure lengths in segments to the use of cranes. And the cranes could be placed either up behind the abutment here on the Moon Island side, they could be placed on a barge offset where there's sufficient draft, or they could be placed up on the structure. So it's a combination of cranes working from those locations that will install these pieces to reach the shoreline on the Quincy side. Will I speak to this? As we described, consistent with best practices, we are seeking to improve the water quality through the area. Previously on the old bridge, the runoff from the bridge deck ran to scuppers which dumped directly into the ocean. We are not doing that. We are collecting the water on the bridge deck and we're running it back to a water quality structure here on the Moon Island side. There's an overflow system from that water quality structure that will pipe the water out to the first pier, so that brings us out beyond the tidal zone, and then we bring the pipe down to the pier structure itself, and once we're below the pier cap, we will, it outlets down into the ocean from that. The treated water will outlet down to the ocean from that location.
So once again, this is our final slide and the end of our presentation, but wanted to emphasize what I said earlier, which is we have gone to great lengths to minimize the footprint of the project with respect to wetland resource areas under your jurisdiction. And once again, we are not proposing to make any alterations to land under the ocean. We are proposing only 80 square feet of coastal beach, which is also potentially land containing shellfish. We don't believe it is. There is 512 square feet of coastal bank, which is essentially work associated with putting the temporary structure on top of the foundation of Pier 1, and 592 square feet of land subject to coastal storm flowage. All of those are temporary impacts that will be mitigated at the conclusion of the construction work. And I also wanted to mention that there is about 126 square feet of buffer zone alteration associated once again with the repaving, with the approach roadway on the top of Moon Island. So that's our presentation, and we're happy to answer questions that you may have.
At the present plan, will there be any new piers or using all existing piers?
Using entirely existing piers. Two piers will not be reused. One in Boston and Pier 1, as I referenced to.
So how will these areas be remediated after the temporary structures are removed?
Which area, are you talking about the coastal bank?
Yeah.
Or are you talking about the
any
coastal
of the
beach? So the coastal bank is, as I said, there's a piece of slab at grade foundation material, and we're going to reutilize that for the placement of the temporary structure, and we're not planning to remove the concrete from the site at the end of that work. So really there's not going to be a lot of modification or any kind of impact to that area, but we will agree to do whatever revegetation or planting of seeds that is required to naturalize that area. And as far as the where the pipe piles will be placed in the coastal beach, what we anticipate is that the contractor, once they're done with the construction of the work, will remove the pipe piles back out of the beach. And the beach, it's a high energy zone. There's a lot of wave action, and our sense is that it's going to restore itself. If there's other restoration that is required after that, we can certainly talk about that. But it's sand and it's material that will replace itself with wave action.
With the existing piers, do they have to be repaired in some way? And where will that work be done?
So yeah, I'm actually going to direct that question to Marganis, but the answer is yes, they do need to be strengthened. And Mark described that in some detail, but you can add more details.
Yes, the use of the post-tensioning system will provide the necessary capacity for the piers relative to current loading requirements. There will be some repairs required around the masonry repointing, and that will be on an as-needed basis. But the strength of the system will come from the post-tensioning of the concrete core.
This is a significant project for the city of Quincy, and we're certainly not the final word here at the Conservation Commission, but I think I'm going to defer to other people that might have comments or questions about it right now. Any other questions?
Yeah. At the meeting that was held with your Conservation Commission, there
With
was some
Boston.
there was some discussion as to an amount of lead in the ground as a result of the demolition. Has anything been updated as far as the amount of lead that has gone into the...
So once again, I think I'm going to defer that question to STV, but there are, I'll let you speak to it.
So the structure was dropped in the water and was removed from the water, and I believe the requirements were that pieces of a certain size must all be removed for the completion of the work. And as we understand it, that work was completed in accordance with that criteria.
It may have been completed according to the plan.
Yes.
But what was discussed at your meeting in Boston was that the water has suffered lead contamination. And I'm wondering if any research has been done on that.
Well, we have not run water tests for the presence of lead in the water. But unfortunately, that bridge was a very old and dilapidated structure by the time of its removal. And there was certainly a good percentage of material from that bridge that had already dissipated into the water sheet prior to the removal. So I'm not sure if there's been any real change in the levels of lead through that demolition process. But so I don't know if there's any data to test against in terms of the levels of lead that was out there.
So going forward, you're going to leave whatever's in the water there?
This project is predicated on not touching the waterbed, if at all possible.
Sorry, and if I may, my name is Sam Nabulsi. I'm with the City of Boston as well. So with respect to the lead issue, there's two opportunities, right? So number one is a lot of the contamination, to the extent that there is any hazardous material which hasn't been studied, the city is going through the MEPA process as well, and so if there are any considerations or issues with respect to hazardous materials, that will be discovered through the Massachusetts Contingency Plan and any laws or regulations applicable there. So there is a regulator, and there will be due diligence with respect to hazardous materials. And the other things, I agree with you, Commissioner. It's probably not just enough that we comply with the plans that were prepared, but this commission also did issue 2 certificates of compliance with respect to the demolition. So to the extent that some of those issues were dealt with in the order of conditions, this board has made a determination that the demolition did comply with all the conditions in those previous orders. But like I said, we are doing the MEPA filing, and so some of these issues will be discovered there, and there's a public comment period. And so to the extent, if there's anything and nothing's been studied, that's not going to go ignored as we go through this permitting process.
Let's look for, turn it over to other witnesses or questions from the public or other questions.
Good evening, Commissioners. My name is John Shea. I'm Special Environmental Counsel to Quincy, and I'm going to offer some brief introductory remarks. Brief because I'm suffering from allergies and asthma, and I'm going to a coughing fit, and it's not a pleasant sound. So after my introductory remarks, I'm going to ask Tracy Adamski, a wetlands specialist, and David Murphy, professional engineer, both of Ty and Bond, working for the city, to summarize two documents that are being submitted tonight. And together, they will highlight the information that is absolutely necessary for this commission to fully and fairly evaluate the notice of intent on significant and cumulative adverse impacts on wetlands and wetland values that you are charged to protect under the Wetlands Protection Act and under your wetlands ordinance. You also will hear from Paul Costello, some of you know, the city engineer, and he'll speak as well. The memo that was just provided to you is the collaborative project of the professionals at Ty and Bond, including Duncan Malore, a renowned coastal engineer, Paul Costello, Al Garzioso, and other city professionals. Excuse me. Arizona, I think it's one of those robocalls. I apologize. A second document attached to the information request memo is the underwater assessment performed by Ty and Bond. As you acknowledge, this is a significant project for the city of Quincy, and I'm sure you are aware that Mayor Koch and the Squantum residents are opposed to the construction of the Long Island Bridge for land access to the former drug treatment center on Long Island. Mayor Koch is firmly behind the treatment of victims of drug and alcohol addiction, as evidenced by the many programs in Quincy. He also seeks a role for the Long Island facility. However, the mayor and the residents believe water access is a feasible, more cost-effective alternative with fewer environmental impacts, especially since there are existing docks at Long Island. Certainly the cost will be far less than the $92 million that the city of Boston estimates this will cost. We think it's going to be a lot more. I think one of the interesting things is that water access was publicly studied and endorsed by the late Mayor Tom Menino. But Mayor Walsh apparently has a different agenda. I appeared before the Boston Conservation Commission on May 16th during its review of the 25% of the span of the bridge. And I told them, as I'll say to you tonight, that the final decision on the mode of access may be a political decision. I did not ask the Boston Conservation Commission, and I'm not asking this commission to make a political decision. I do ask that you evaluate the project under the Wetlands Protection Act and your ordinance on the merits. I ask that you request, indeed demand, the information you need to conduct that evaluation. One of the things I told the Boston Conservation Commission was that they were empowered to require an alternatives analysis to compare the roadway bridge to the dock access with respect to wetland impacts. The applicant replied that the alternatives analysis is for review under MEPA. And amazingly, you heard that again tonight in response to your question. If there's a hazardous waste problem, that's going to be dealt with by MEPA. Well, MEPA's not a permitting agency, and it can't require certain things to be done. They can require certain studies to be performed, but they're not the panacea for the problems that we identify as evidenced by the lack of information. Don't hang your hat on the MEPA unit at EOEA as solving the problems that you need to address under the wetlands statutes. Ironically, by seeking the order of conditions first, the applicant can really, what I call, game the alternatives analysis that would be performed at MEPA. Because when they go into MEPA, they're going to say, the preferred alternative is the bridge. And they're not going to stare real hard at other alternatives that might reduce wetland impacts, i.e. the water access issue. So, unfortunately, I would say the Boston Conservation Commission was wired to approve the bridge. It didn't take the time to review the tie-in bond 9-page memo that we submitted that day. In fact, one of the commissioners said, I can't vote on this project. I haven't even reviewed what the lack of information claim is. And yet, they voted to approve the project. The commission even had a draft approval order of conditions that the applicant had reviewed and approved before the hearing that night. I know this commission does not have the political or legal infirmity of having a draft denial order or condition in its back pocket. Now, I urge you to take the time to obtain and review all the information that tie-in bond says that you need, and then issue a decision on the merits. I would say that although this presentation was a slight improvement over what was presented to the Boston Conservation Commission, I advised the applicant that night that you ought to satisfy our information needs, because we're going to be telling the Quincy Conservation Commission that they need that same information. I didn't hear it tonight. I haven't heard satisfactory answers. So, at this point, I'm going to ask Tracy and Dave to present to you, not read to you the detailed memo that they have prepared, and to identify the key informational needs. Thank you. Tracy?
Good evening. For the record, I'm Tracy Adamski. I'm a planner with tie-in bonds. I've been preparing environmental permit applications and reviewing them for over 20 years now. So we had been requested by the city of Quincy, recognizing the importance of this project, to review the notice of intent application that was prepared on behalf of the city of Boston for the Long Island Bridge, with the
under the purview of the Conservation Commission and looking at how it complies with the Wetlands Protection Act as well as the Quincy Wetlands Protection Ordinance. And well, as presented today, the impacts identified within the notice of intent are significantly limited. Our concern is that they have not been adequately identified. And there is a number of concerns and additional information that we are requesting on behalf of the city so that the Conservation Commission can make an informed review, an informed opinion to make sure that all the resource area impacts are truly identified so that they can be mitigated for as needed. And I'll go through some of the highlights. Dave is here to talk about some of the detailed engineering concerns as well. So we'll start with the piers. As indicated today, there's no impacts proposed at this point in time under land underwater. The application as it stands, and as was noted here today, that there will be some repairs needed to be made to the piers. Currently, in the notice of intent, they're only talking about doing above waterline pier repairs. And we question, what needs to happen below the waterline and what impacts would be required in order to do that. There have been, or I guess one of our first requests is for a structural analysis of those piers and a report that identifies what are the repairs that are needed to be made to the pier structures and what's required for those. Anything underwater is likely to require that work be done in the dry, which would mean cofferdams, which would mean additional impact to land underwater around each and every one of the piers within the city of Quincy's jurisdiction. There have been, one of the reports that was provided to you today was a dive inspection that was performed by Pine and Bond that Dave can speak to, that identifies some areas where there's grout that's missing and granite blocks that are missing underwater that would, we anticipate would need to be repaired. There was also a Mass DOT inspection report that was done for the piers back in 2013. So this would have been before the demolition, but it identified some cracking within the granite blocks, again, some missing caulking, and some repairs that needed to be made associated with those. And so we would like to request from the applicant how they're addressing that. What has their structural assessment been, and what are they proposing for full repairs of those piers? Furthermore, they're talking about installing a new deck. The bridge that was there, has been there for decades. Those piers have been there for decades prior to some of the more recent design standards that are being required. So this is to address, say, seismic conditions. Have those piers been reviewed to make sure that they are going to be in compliance with the most current standards? Another concern is whether or not they have looked at ASR, which is alkali silica reactivity within the concrete, which can diminish the structural stability of the concrete. We know that there's some of this concrete on the Long Island seawall. We don't know if that's also within the pier structures. As Moon Island Road is the only access road to the site, our question is, have they assessed additional improvements that need to be made in order to provide access to the bridge so that the commission can review the entirety of the project and the project impacts within resource area within the Conservation Commission's jurisdiction in order to not only construct the bridge but also provide access to the bridge. The bridge is located within habitat of the Natural Heritage Endangered Species Program. And Division of Marine Fisheries have also received a copy of the Notice of Intent. We request if there has been any correspondence with those agencies and if they've requested any additional information or mitigation for what is being proposed. John had mentioned request for an alternatives analysis to identify that and confirm that all mitigation or all impacts have been fully vetted, all alternatives have been fully vetted so that a true assessment of whether or not the impact areas have truly been mitigated are included in that assessment. With respect to the bridge deck, I believe the anticipated cross-section is, to kind of provide what was there previously. And we're requesting additional information on what is the additional traffic, the types of vehicles that are required, and is that cross-section adequate for the transportation needs that are being proposed. We have not seen any data regarding that in order to be able to confirm that. Again, with respect to resource area impact calculations, all of this information we feel is necessary in order for the commission to make an informed decision on full limits of resource area impacts. As mentioned before, if they do need cofferdams, at a minimum, if they have to extend 5 feet out from each of the piers, you're talking about an additional 900 square feet of impact at each pier, as there are a number of piers within the city limits. That would be another 5,400 square feet of additional impacts that have not been accounted for in the current notice of intent. So this is one of the reasons why we are requesting this additional information, to make sure that we truly know what that limit of impact needs to be. With regards to means and methods, oftentimes we like to, there's only so much that we can require of a contractor. However, the applicant and the Conservation Commission has within their rights to be able to set the parameters for the contractor to work in and to provide some recommendations for best management practices. And so we would like some additional information on how they are going to be addressing turbidity with respect to the construction, with respect to barge flooding, and other impacts that may be occurring. There is a barge staging area that's proposed off of Moon Island, and there's no detailed information as to what is going to be included on those barges, how the equipment is going to be offloaded onto Moon Island or onto the construction site, and what are some of the best management practices that will be put into place to address things like erosion and sedimentation controls, hazardous materials that may be on construction equipment that's being used, or even an operation and maintenance plan for the stormwater management system that's put in place after the fact. One of the other items that we're requesting is some additional information on, with respect to coastal bank, confirmation on delineation in accordance with CZM's recent guidance manual for all things coastal, as well as providing some of the details that you had requested previously with respect to vegetation and how that area will be stabilized post-construction. As mentioned previously, one of you had mentioned the potential for lead to be within the sediment. As the tidal waters flow towards Walston Beach and Walston Bay, one concern is how are they going to be addressing turbidity so that the materials that happen to be in the sediment aren't kicked up and put into the water column and heading into Quincy waters. And with that, that pretty much summarizes the main points within our memo. But again, our biggest concern on behalf of the city is truly and fully understanding the overall impacts to resource areas, so that you have an idea of what those overall impacts are, so they can better have an understanding and how to mitigate and permit and set those parameters for the construction going forward. With that, I think actually Mike Clark from Design Consultants Inc. has something to add.
Thank you, Tracy. Good evening, Mr. Chairman, Commissioners, Mr. Duca. When we heard that the project, when I say we, Mr. Duca and I, we heard that the Long Island Bridge project was being proposed, Mr. Duca asked me, as the individual who provided technical assistance during the demolition of the project to the city of Quincy, to go back and review the status of the order conditions. I believe I heard one of the city representatives say that there was a certificate of compliance issued. There's only been a partial certificate of compliance issued on the demolition project. I believe it's special condition 25, which refers to the seabed restoration. That is still open. And then also during that review process, we became aware of another technicality that the existing order of conditions is expired. So I just wanted to clear up that that information was provided by the city of Boston. Now it's time for Mr. Murphy from Mr. Costello from the city engineer's office.
Thanks, Mike. My name is Paul Costello. I'm the city of Quincy engineer. I'm also a trained geotechnical foundation engineer. I did a thorough review of the NOI, and I concur, and I just want to reiterate what Ty and Bond said. The two main issues are the integrity of the piers and the estimate on how much wetland impact area there will be. The piers have a history of cracked blocks. They have a history of past settlement. The project proponent admitted that there's pointing issues in the past. There's voids, and the blocks have been filled with lead. They say that they will study the lead issue in the future. We've already started the cleanup. We were down there for about 8 hours. The dive team, here's a piece of lead that came out of the piers. Much of this is lying on the ocean floor. It's resulted in voids. That has to be repaired. Typically, that is done with a cofferdam placed around the pier by about 5 feet. And I concur with what Ty and Bond is saying. The piers themselves have to be designed for 2018 standards. The existing piers were designed with a bridge back in 1950. They say that they're matching the weight of the bridge with the previous bridge, but 2 piers are being removed. I have to question the loading on the remainder of those piers that are intact. The spread footings that they're relying on bear on the soil. Today there are seismic regulations, so the footings that were designed in 1950 may not meet today's seismic regulations. Again, the MCP concerning lead was not around in 1950, so the cleanup standards have to be complied with. With all this said, I think the definition of the wetland impact area, which is in your purview tonight, needs to be investigated thoroughly. At the Boston hearing, they said they would come back later if there was an impact on the water, and they would file a notice of intent or an amendment. We need to find that out now, because the impact area could potentially result in Corps of Engineer 401, 404 permitting. And we estimate if a cofferdam is placed around all the piers, we'll exceed the 5,000 square feet, and the Corps of Engineers will need to be involved. So with that said, I strongly recommend that you look at the wetland impact areas, and I concur with what Ty and Bond is saying. I just want to turn it over to Ty and Bond.
Mr. Costello, before we we don't get a lot of pier construction before us, so that is an issue for us. Well, how do the copper dams that would now be used?
There were existing steel sheeting that was installed when the pier were built. We'd have to go outside those structures. They're about 4 feet off, so we'd have to go about 5 feet around each of the piers. They said earlier that they would assess those impacts, particularly related to the pointing of the blocks. We know that there's problems, the pointing of the blocks. It's been well documented by our professionals and others. We know that there's pointing issues. We know that there's lead issues. So let's design the cofferdam around each of the piers and do it the right way. I question the structural integrity of their methods. It's a means and methods issue. Customarily, put the cofferdam in, clean up the lead, fix the pointing, and move on. And I would also do an assessment of the existing spread footings on the soil relative to the seismic loading. And if that is done by today's 2018 standards, then they'll need Corps of Engineer permit. Dave Murphy?
Good evening, Commissioners. My name is David Murphy. I'm a principal at the firm Ty and Bond. We serve with the pleasure of the city. You've heard from Tracy Adamski already our concerns regarding the need for additional information for the Commission to properly assess the impacts. I just want to pass out one more report to you. This is, come back to the mic in a second. So the Commission now has two reports in front of it. One is a Ty and Bond report that was submitted earlier. That was our dive team. We were supplemented by our subcontractors. We're in that dive team. We inspected the substructure of the underwater portion of the existing piers and found concrete deterioration behind the granite. We found missing blocks. We found significant loss of grout, the lead grout that was Mr. Costello just referred to. We found significant quantities of lead on the ocean floor as a result of that lead coming out. Not parts per million, we're talking pure lead in pounds/tons of lead in and around those piers. So it's a significant quantity of lead that needs to be addressed. The pointing of the granite blocks needs to occur. We don't know of a decent method to do that in the wet. The applicant has actually said that there is no plans to do that other than as necessary. Well, as necessary could have significant impacts that need to be documented before this commission. So we're asking for basically the reports that Tracy discussed that are in the memo. This second report that I just handed to you is a Mass Department of Transportation, their underwater operations team. It's called a routine underwater inspection report, and I would point you to three sections. One is the Stems Webb's pier walls. It's rated 4 out of 10. The pointing for these piers was rated 3 out of 10, and the settlement, they actually observed settlement of the blocks as part of the piers was rated 4 out of 10. So there's, again, we have settlement of the actual blocks, we have pointing that has to be done, and we have concrete deterioration. So there's issues with those piers that we believe that truly needs to be, that information has to be presented before the commission. The commission needs to understand that and understand the potential impacts associated with that additional work. With that, thank you very much. Mr. Harris.
Thank you. My name is William Harris. I'm a Ward 6 City Councilor. I represent the people who live on Moon Island, where Moon Island is located. And I'd like to also have by my side former Ward 6 City Councilor and state representative who represents the people of the area, Representative Ayers. First of all, I appreciate the opportunity to speak this evening to express my thoughts about the importance of the interests that this commission and the other regulatory agencies who will be reviewing this project are charged with protecting. The consultants who are working on Quincy's behalf have called to my attention very serious concerns about the application before you. Although we are from Quincy, each of you and I share a very important quality. We are each public officials who are entrusted to protect the interests of the residents we serve and to protect the public treasures in our respective communities. The Harbor Islands and Boston Harbor are such treasures. We have an obligation when a construction project of this magnitude is proposed that will most certainly impact those treasures to ensure that the impact is properly mitigated and no damage is done. I have two primary concerns to raise to you. I am not an engineer, and you are hearing from some excellent ones tonight. But in layman's terms, I am very concerned about stormwater discharges from the proposed structure and the potential for impact on tidal waters that flow into the Moon Island Inlet. Abutting the Squantum community and into the Wollaston Beach area. I am also bothered that Boston continues to undertake this project without explaining why it will not invest in the less expensive, more environmentally friendly alternative of ferry service. Our engineers have raised a number of serious concerns, all of which go away. Boston will simply tap the existing ferry capabilities, which can easily be expanded to serve Long Island, all the while using existing pier systems on both Long Island, in Boston, and in Quincy. Imagine the opportunity presented if the two communities work together on access to Long Island, rather than to being forced to spend the sort of money we each must spend to engineer a bridge that is most certainly going to impact the greater Long Island environment, which includes the community I represent. I ask that you good public officials give this application your full and expert vetting, and please give attention to the details of our experts who have raised a number of serious and legitimate concerns about this project. But I'm going to add, if roles were reversed and we were building a bridge to Boston, we would be standing in front and we would have to have community meetings, a community meeting. You'd have to reach out to the ward councilor who represents the people who are going to be affected. This has not happened. Not one correspondence has come to me. And I am the person who represents the people who are going to be most affected. In Boston, you have to go in front of neighborhood committees. And they push back all the time in Boston. But the presentation we got in front of us today, and I still haven't heard the answer about the question of lead. It really hasn't been answered. So I'll wrap up. Thank you for allowing me to speak, this opportunity to speak. I look forward to your diligent work in protecting our public treasures. With this, I am honored to call up Representative Bruce Ayers.
Mr. Chairman, members of the Conservation Commission, for the record, my name is Bruce Ayers, State Representative, and I appreciate the opportunity to speak tonight. As a resident growing up on Wollaston Beach and as a former city councilor, I've been closely following the Long Island Bridge issue for many, many years. And tonight, I'd like to share some of my concerns pertaining to this proposal. There are three major concerns related to the transportation, structure, and the hazardous material associated with the bridge that are involved with this project. Transportation and structural concerns. The Moon Island Road is a narrow, undersized road that can barely handle the existing traffic. There are signs of erosion that continue to weaken the infrastructure. The existing piers are old and fatigued and are showing signs of cracks in the granite blocks and the mortar holding them together. As a result, they cannot provide the necessary support for the new steel structure. These pre-existing conditions will not meet the necessary standards for a new bridge. This will result in changes to the pilings, causing a significant impact on the wetlands and soil, disrupting the lead contaminants. Hazardous materials. For over 50 years, sediments have been exposed to the lead paint chips from the old bridge that have now settled in the shallow water depths in the soil. The hazard of runoff, including the lead and other contaminants, including from the detonation, is going to be disturbed and will be carried through the tide flows and the currents. When disturbed, the runoff will severely impact and pollute the surrounding areas, including Wollaston Beach, Nickerson Beach, Quincy Bay, and surrounding areas. Mr. Chairman, Members, Boston's plan to rebuild Long Island Bridge is environmentally and fiscally irresponsible. It's a project that will severely impact the wetlands and pollute our waters. An alternative means of transportation, such as a ferry, would alleviate all of these environmental concerns that we've been discussing tonight. To go forward with this bridge will have lasting negative environmental consequences on our ecosystem. Therefore, Mr. Chairman, based on the plans I've heard from the City of Boston and the questions, I strongly oppose this permit. Thank you.
Before we turn to the general public, is there anyone else from this other officials that want to make a comment?
Good evening, my name is Jay McRitchie. I'm a resident of Squantum. I've been involved in affairs and issues with Long Island and the surrounding wetlands for my entire life. I was a little concerned tonight to hear questions about the structural integrity of the existing piers. We hear that the pointing, that there's water infiltration, that there's concrete blocks that are sinking and missing and so forth. And I was shocked to hear that these inside the piers are wooden timber piles holding them up. It seems that every month I'm reading about some building in the Back Bay that was built on timber piers, and changes in the water tables have caused buildings to have severe structural damage. And they're going to use these same piers because they don't want to they don't want to come in and dig around and make sure that they're structurally sound. Or they say, well, we're going to, it sounds like something my dentist did, you know, a root canal type of thing. Oh, we're going to drill down and pour more concrete in there, and that's going to take care of the whole problem. And I'm not sure that it is. This bridge, and they say it has a lifespan of 75 years, and it's going to be built on rotting timbers, you know, that doesn't make sense at all. And what they're really trying to do is avoid what I think is the biggest problem, and that's the sediment bed in and around the area where the bridge is to be built. And it's all caused by the City of Boston, because that was where all their sewerage for generations and generations was pumped out. The idea was it would go on the outgoing tide, and it never did. And I'm sure that lead in the soil is probably the least of the problems. Anything that was manufactured in Boston for 150 years, any byproducts that they wanted to get rid of, they dumped it in the sewer and pumped it out, and it's right along that corridor where the Long Island Bridge would be rebuilt. So I think the sediments there, and they're all the responsibility of the City of Boston, are the real Achilles heel to this project. And I think this board needs the information as to what's there, not just lead. I heard it when I was at the Squantum meeting, people talked about, well, there's asbestos and there's, you know, there's this and there's that. I'm sure, you know, before there were environmental regulations and before there was a Wetlands Protection Act, everything just got dumped in the harbor. And that went on for years and years. It all sunk right out there where it got discharged from the vats at Moon Island. And I would think the most cautious thing to do would be for the City of Quincy or to ask the City of Boston to take soil samples of the sediments that are there, the full depth of whatever those piers are. I don't know how deep those piers are, but they go down pretty far, probably down to bedrock, and I certainly think it would be worthwhile for the Conservation Commission to know what's there and what's going to be disturbed. We talked about the old bridge when it was demolished, and it was detonated and it kind of fell into the water and they had to pick everything out. We don't know what they did to the sediment beds or the depths of sediment, again, that have been there for generations. And it's probably worse than any, I'll go out on a limb and say it's probably as bad or worse as any hazardous waste site on solid land in New England area. And I think it really ought to be studied, and I think this board ought to know what's there, what's the condition of those piers, what has to be done before any order of conditions is granted. And I think the city of Boston, it should be incumbent on them to provide that information, and I hope you get it. Thank you.
Good evening, my name is Stephen Tumley and I live in Schooner Lane in Quincy. As you pointed out, this is a rather significant proposal for a rather significant project. And it appears to me it's totally dependent on building a new bridge on the existing piers. 6 of those piers exist within the city of Quincy under your authority. And what they're presented today is that those piers as they currently exist are not capable of supporting a new bridge. And they proposed a scheme, that's all I would call it, of how to fix that by doing some repairs and some drilling and some other methods which they say then will require or will allow those piers to support a new bridge. That information that you've gotten tonight is dependent solely on the proponent's proposal from their engineering. You don't have an independent engineering proposal. You don't have a peer review of their proposal. And that's something I know. I don't know how the Conservation Commission works, but the planning board often requires a peer review when they get a case like this. As controversial, the proponent comes in with their engineering and someone says, well, I'm not so sure of that. They then require that proponent to pay for an independent review. And I would certainly suggest that the Conservation Commission do that, that this shouldn't be approved without an independent peer review that looks at how this would be done. As you've seen from the city of Quincy, they've proposed a number of issues that haven't been addressed by the proponent. And I can't see, or I certainly would urge you not to approve this until all of those questions have been answered. I think the same argument applies to the connection of the bridge to Moon Island. That looks like a scheme that, again, is new, something I doubt has been, as you said, you don't have many bridges, but I don't think that's been done before, certainly hasn't been done in the original construction. And that opens up a number of conservation issues, at least as I see it. The third issue, which I think Representative Ayers mentioned, is Moon Island Road. They haven't really talked about that, but that's a small deteriorated road running through land that is within the city of Quincy. And the impact on the conservation area, the wetlands in that area hasn't been talked about at all. I would assume that to get transportation out there, they're going to have to do something to that road. That hasn't been presented, and I think that also ought to be looked at because the bridge doesn't make much sense if you can't get to it. And my only other comment would be, which isn't really your issue, but since there's been a lot of talk about this, not in my backyard, the only thing I would say is if you read the Boston Globe editorial, if you look at John Bernanke's column, the issue of not in my backyard applies to Boston. They're the ones who have gotten the complaints about what they so-called the methadone mile and come up with a scheme to spend $100 to $120 million to warehouse people who need treatment, to warehouse them on an island where there are no Boston neighbors going to complain. So this isn't, I know, not in your backyard as people presented to the district attorney when he appeared before the Boston City Council, at least not in Quincy. We're in favor of treatment. We're not in favor of this type of impact. By the way, I think $100 million would go a long way to build a nice treatment facility, not just to get there. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Michael Morrissey, I want to live in Lansdowne Street. I'm a lifelong resident. Half my life I've lived in Squantum. I concur with the last speaker and a couple briefly about, and I think people have mentioned it, trying to minimize the impact. Well, there's a number of ways that can be done, obviously, and so we don't have to go through the building, and that would obviously look at alternatives in Boston, like the Shattuck Hospital. It's going to be abandoned, and that would set up a campus, no need for a bridge, and as Steve just suggested, they could spend the money, but we won't go into that because it's beyond your purview. Ironically, the roadway which we touched upon, the Moon Island Road by a number of speakers, is underneath that is the culvert that Boston used to send this, which we affectionately refer to as Squantum-owned built-in pools, the VATS, which were the first sewage treatment plant in the country, the settling tanks that allowed sewage to come into Boston Harbor and treated, which at the turn of the century. But that roadway is crumbling, and ideally you're going to build a bridge on an access road that's crumbling. I think that the extension of the need of your purview, because clearly that road is gonna fall under the purview of the Conservation Commission. And, well, I know that you may not be able to take a look at traffic issues. I do quote, though, I find it somewhat amusing that the city of Boston did a study in 2002, and they said Long Island is one of only 2 harbor islands that have roadway access to the mainland. Of course, the other one is in Moon Island, which is in the city of Quincy. However, the landside roadway network in Quincy cannot support additional vehicular traffic, and the condition of the Causeways Bridge has deteriorated to the point where they've had to impose restrictions on its use. Now, I know Boston did such a great job maintaining the last bridge that we should obviously bend over and help them do that as well. But when you take a look at the issues, I heard the issue of water runoff. And water runoff from the bridge, they're going to collect it, I believe, and by the sound of it, they're going to run it down the piers and into the water. But what I didn't hear anything about was oil and gas separators, and how they're going to treat that water that's going to be put into the bay and have damage of marine life. Now, one of the calculations I think you need, which is a fair assessment for you to ask, is what does the traffic look like going into Long Island? I mean, how would we know? Now, ironically, the councilor, and others have mentioned, if I know the mayor's person, I'd love to have you respond. If I was doing a development in the city of Boston, I would not be before the Conservation Commission long before, that would be one of the last steps. I would have been meeting with the neighbors in the neighborhood. I've been meeting with the community association and any other board, and they have not met with anybody. And this is hide the ball. There's so many, they want to take this project in pieces, and they want to take advantage of you, the commission, when really, what is going out on Long Island? I mean, what about open space? How much car, how much traffic, how many people, what kind of visitors? What kind of alternative access is there? And I understand now they're going to have a barge use terminal, probably near the fire department, but I didn't see that on the plans. But ironically, wouldn't it be much easier to put in that barge use terminal, to put in a ferry that could carry heavy equipment and/or emergency vehicles back and forth to Long Island on a regular basis without building a bridge? But it appears no consideration has been put into that yet. They're building the barge use terminal already. And all they have to do is put a terminal on the other end. And it's funny that when you, some of you have heard about climate change. I know that some people have not. But you know, they're going to build a bridge out to from Moon Island to Long Island, but yet on the guise of bringing emergency vehicles across a bridge to a community. Squantum has, despite all the good work we've done raising the causeway and the road, we go underwater more and more. We're closed during periods of heavy snow and other issues. So getting emergency vehicles off, if that's the rationale, it doesn't make a lot of sense to me, because you're going to be trapped in Squantum like the rest of us. And obviously, getting people to, there's no longer any Quincy Medical Center, so you're going to be taking people to the BMC. Good luck going down the expressway, crossing the Ponset Bridge, and pray you don't have a medical emergency during rush hour. And finally, ironically, they're making such great use of the island for Camp Harborview. Some of our most vulnerable populations throughout this serviced by a ferry, very successfully. The ferry terminal was $1 million. Now, if someone was hurt out there at that time, what would they do? Boat a helicopter. And clearly other alternatives that are not being considered, and asking you to support such a proposal. Now, the barges, I don't see any displacement, and I have a rigger with me, but ironically, the weight of the barges and the various pieces obviously are going to have an impact on what the depth is. Mr. Brennan, you're a sailor and a boater, and you'd understand some of that. So I also know that they say that first section from Moon Island is going to be done by cranes. Probably makes some sense because it's very shallow. But I also think the second and third section are pretty shallow too, because I would not go in there, and I've been boating my whole life. My parents used to sail across during the subnets in the 40s when they had the subtenders there to secure Boston Harbor before there was a bridge. And don't be fooled, the bridge was built to support the Nike missile defense system, not to support the hospital. 62 years they had a ferry service that served the island quite admirably. And I know that the ferry service, I'm sure, has deteriorated to such a level in the year 2018 that as compared to the 1950s. I mean, you got to be kidding me. We have a very vibrant ferry service as another alternative. So I would just ask that the calculations be done on some of the displacements and the drafts. And also, you're going to move those barges around with a tug. The tug is going to stir up sediment. And along with the runoff and the water and the oil that's going to get into that area. And someone obviously mentioned the piers, so we're going to have dredging, which triggers another aspect of the wetlands aspect they have control over. You know, the bridge was removed almost 4 years ago, and they're still in non-compliance. And yet we also haven't heard anything from the mayor of Boston except a phone call to the mayor of Quincy the night before he announced his plan. And yet, ironically, they haven't had a long-term contract with SVT the vendor, see, you can ask them when they started the design work, I'd love to know, but I would tell you that it's over a couple of years ago, they've been working on the project in silence without involving any public input. No surprise. And I would ask that you hold making a decision until the applicants actually had a legitimate public hearing before the residents of the city of Quincy. The same standard by which you would require people appearing in Boston, is that not true? You represent the mayor, is that not true? Do people have to do that?
We're certainly happy to have to join a public conversation and invite you.
I'd like to have a conversation, never mind a public conversation. I don't think there has been one at all, which I went to the city council yesterday. And obviously, it's a long history of lack of conversations, which is why we find ourselves in this situation right now. You have no one to blame but yourself. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate the opportunity to have a couple of comments.
So there are probably other comments, but,
I'd like to say something.
well, my sense is, before there are other comments, my sense is we're gonna need more information.
Well, public comments are still open.
Well, just a minute, just a minute.
So far, it's just been public officials, like regular people should have an opportunity to
Just a
speak.
minute. We're gonna need more information, so do you want to,
We need a continuance till the next meeting at least, to give everyone time to get all their answers together. Because more questions have been asked than,
we'll have a couple more public comments here tonight, but I'm just gonna let people know this is unlikely to be the end of it. So, there will be more comments on it. A couple things that make sense to, well, we have the memo from the peer review makes sense to me, projects of this magnitude. We have the start of that with the tie and bond questions, which is the same kind of questions that I was thinking of with the piers and the condition of them. We can appreciate the applicant wanting to minimize impact by using existing structures, but if those existing structures were built in the 50s, there's issues about that. So what is the sense of the board as far as?
Mr. Chairman, may I?
Sure.
After you hear the rest of testimony from the public, I'd like to address the board.
Okay. Well, then let's get some more public comment here tonight, but as I said, the sense of the board is we're not going to close the hearing tonight, so if there's more comments at another date or we want to collect more information, but please go ahead today.
Thank you. John Rutherfield, 62 Grand Mall Road. I've been up here January 2017 was my first meeting, and other than the ones when there weren't enough people for a quorum, I recorded every meeting. And basically, the same level of scrutiny must be given to the city of Boston that you've given to everyone. And I honestly remember every single thing that's come before this board, passing very easily with not very many questions. I want to just say to Marty Walsh and the city of Boston that there are people in the city that support people who are trying to do something with the opioid crisis. That bridge is going to open. This is a waste of time. We have a whole bunch of people coming up, one after another person, who are being paid extra legal help, extra special counsel. This is going to happen, and it's really just, the ultimate dog and pony show. I mean, this should just really be approved, and, you should, even if there was, say, a public meeting out in Squantum, what would the city of Boston do to those 300 people that were out there? So I was at a public meeting last night about someone wanting to open up a pawn shop on Washington Street in Quincy, and one of the comments that many of the neighbors said, and they were very against the pawn shop, and one of the things they said that there's people doing heroin on these rocks outside of 7-Eleven. So we need someone to do something about it, and I'm not sure, that bridge was open before, it's going to be open again, and basically everyone who was up before me speaking, they're getting paid to speak, so they would like to continue this as long as possible. I would like you to just approve this. I mean, this is really insulting to our...
That's not what we do. There's an environmental assessment we have to
Well,
ask
but I mean,
these questions,
but I
we
mean,
have to know
I'm just
these
saying,
things.
I'm
There's
not
an
sure.
No, there's an impact to the environment.
I've heard the argument that Boston's spending $91 million. Well, it's Boston money. They weren't here when we were gonna spend $80 million on the DIF. And when we're talking about lead, I would concentrate in getting the lead out of the water in the schools, which still hasn't been 100% mitigated, okay? So I just want to get on record that I am for the city of Boston, I am for the bridge, and I am for people who are trying to do something against the opioid crisis, because there really is a huge problem. We see it in Quincy. Maybe we should work with the city of Boston if we weren't fighting them like we're doing right now, and maybe they could dedicate 25% of those beds to Quincy residents so we don't have heroin addicts sprawled all around the streets. As soon as a Quincy police officer finds one, they can take them right to Long Island. We can have an express shuttle to Long Island. I actually think it's a good idea, because if you deny this project, what will happen is developers will come develop that. It will be like Marina Bay. You'll have people from New York going up and down the marina, going up and down the boulevard. I think this is a good use for that property, and I think it definitely should be approved. Thank you.
How's it going? My name is Dan Jacobs. I live at 16 Turner Street in Quincy, and I've spoken in front of you before and agree with some of the things that Mr. Rotafeld said here. As you know, I'm a staunch advocate against the Maritime Center, and you guys, it sounds like in this project they're going to be taking, what, 80 square feet to put some pilings into the ground to temporarily set up for a bridge. You know, and you guys are basically against it. I mean, they're doing more damage at the PL just to move the boat ramp so they can buy 3 houses to get a few more parking spots, and you guys had absolutely no interest in talking about that. Also, this is temporary. They're going to be taking it out. Also, as far as the stormwater goes, someone said about it, they're going to be, basically what I saw here, they're going to be running the water out to some filtration system, then moving it back to the first pile, the second pile, and releasing it under the water level, so not releasing it at the top, so whatever sediment is more likely to flow to the bottom than from the top out. Also, again, I'm not an engineer. However, it sounds to me like these people are talking about these these granite blocks that are on the outside of the pilings. Those are most likely decorative. They have no structural standpoint whatsoever. That's why there's grout holding them together, because they're not structural. The only structural part is the concrete, the double base at the bottom, the concrete piling in the middle, plus the top slab. Basically what they're doing is they're going to be removing the top slab and adding a larger, heavier slab onto it, and then drilling a piece of metal, it looks like, into the middle, connecting all 3 pieces, because it sounds like right now they're just, the only weight that's holding together is the weight of the pieces. So right now they're probably less structurally safe because there's no bridge on it. You know, there's no weight to...
We heard that from you.
No, but I'm just saying, some people here have spoken against the bridge, are saying that it's structurally unsound because the granite blocks are falling off, but that doesn't do anything for the structure. As far as if there's wood under the pilings, I assume that that's going to be below grade level, that the concrete's sitting at least on the sand. Salt water preserves wood, that's probably why they used it. I highly doubt that it's seen a lick of water if it's got that much concrete on top of it. You know, as far as, he said, I know that they want to build this ferry project, which is a bunch of baloney, but you know, it sounds to me like they want to build a ferry and have these docks, that there's going to be more environmental impact in building the piers to move the people. Because they're talking about right now 80 square feet is what they're talking about. 4 pilings, right? To build a dock, you're talking multiple. I'd say each one's going to have over 70 pilings each. And those are permanent. And we're talking on 2 different ends. So the ferry actually seems like disrupts the environment more. Not only that, I don't know about how big these ferry boats are going to be. It's very shallow there. I know the only real deep spot is in the middle. That's why the channel's there. It's dug out. So, I mean, you know, you will, if we have large ferries, you know, there will be some sediment kick up, especially at the piers. Also, I hear a lot of people talking about lead in the water. I mean, that's just ridiculous. I understand there's probably lead there. I know that guy showed some lead, whether or not it actually came from there. But, you know, there's a lot of water there, a lot of water. And so that much, I don't know how much lead is there, but I highly doubt it's enough to make a difference. Okay. Okay, so I know, but I just want to, just one other thing too, and it's a little off base. I've spoken in front of this commission before.
Other people have things to say too.
What?
Other people have comments to make.
All right, that's right. We let all these other people talk that had nothing to do with environment. And I've spoken in front of this commission before, and they're not very lenient. You guys are very strict on speaking about environmental aspect only, yet you let 5 or 6 people rant on and on and on and waste a lot of people's time here. All right, so I'd like it if you guys at least keep to that. If you're gonna keep the public to that, you should keep the politicians and the engineers to that same standard. Okay, thank you.
Hi, I will try not to waste a lot of your time. I'm here because I'm one of the immediate abutters. My name is Kristen Chappell. I live at 9 Moon Island Road. I got the notification in the mail because I live within 100 feet of this project, and I'm here to voice my opposition. I have, there's plenty of other people here who could speak to you about the environmental impacts. It seems to me like it'll have a negative environmental impact. I'm simply here because it seems that it's the purpose of this commission to protect Quincy's wetlands, and in so doing, to protect the safety and quality of life of its residents, and my safety and my quality of life will definitely be negatively impacted by this project. And that it will absolutely have a negative impact on that of my neighbors as well. That's all, thank you.
Hi folks, my name is Ann C. Landis. I'm a Quincy resident for 38 years. The design's really nice. The only one problem with all of us from Quincy is that we don't have access to the island. You know how I had access? I came from St. John's, we fed the homeless. And we had to go to the big stop sign, I gave the pass, we're here to serve the homeless.
I don't mean to cut you off, but we do have to focus on you.
Okay, but my question to you is, are you gonna let us in? And also, it's a beautiful environment spot. I'm a very environmental person, and I'd love to be able to go out there and hike and walk. Are you going to let us in?
Good evening. Ann Mahoney. I'm from West Quincy. I'm a councilor at large in the city of Quincy. I'm here in opposition of this project, and I want to make sure that we're talking about the environmental issues. So there are wetland issues, there are sediment issues, there are issues that we have to take seriously. They're before us tonight. They have not had a public hearing. Not only that, but they didn't want to answer questions to the city of Quincy. When I asked for a Freedom of Information Act, they answered nothing. But tonight they're sharing a lot. Yet they didn't share it with anybody in the city of Quincy. They want to spend over $100 million to build a bridge, which is going to end up costing close to $500,000 by the time they're done. And I'm absolutely in disagreement with Mr. Rotafeld. If they wanted to actually solve the crisis of opioids right now, they could do that by going to Mount Ida, by going to the Shattuck Hospital. They could do that. But instead they're coming through the streets of Quincy. The streets of Quincy that they've already been through. We know the problems that this bridge had brought, yet Boston didn't want to come to the tables when the bridge was up to talk to Quincy. Now is our time to make sure that we're protecting the city of Quincy, that we're looking at the environmental issues that are going to impact Quincy, because those runoffs and everything that comes with it will be coming up on the shores of our city. So with 37 miles of coastline, I think now is the time to make sure that we're protecting the environment of our city, both as they're building it, if they were able to build it, but also the other runoffs that's going to happen, the tidal draws that are going to be coming into our city. We know that the impact that they had when they were down in that island when that happened. It's time for us to actually stand up and make sure that we're being represented and that we have a good shot, we have the seat at the table that we need. Should this bridge be built, we should be able to have mitigation rights to be able to go back and make sure that we're being protected. But to do that, we need our commission, we need our city, we need the agencies that we hire to protect us, and we need the city of Boston to come to the table and be honest and fair with us. Until they do that, we have to stand up and be strong. And I ask our commission to do that tonight. Thank you very much.
Any more comments tonight?
Thank you, Jay Duker. I'm the conservation agent. Based on the testimony that I've listened to this evening, I would advise the commission to vote to continue this to a date certain, at which time the applicant can produce the information that was requested by the city's engineers that were hired by the city. I would hope that the applicant agrees to a continuance. If they do not consent to a continuance, I would advise the board to close the hearing and then deliberate and make a decision based on the information that it has before it. Thank you.
You have to go on this one?
First of all,
thank you very much to the commission, to elected officials, to the members of the public in Quincy. Okay with you, we wanted to respond to a couple of the very specific things that came up and then respond to this with ask for continuance. First, I want to talk a little bit about the actual pier structures, and I'd ask Mark.
Thank you. Yes, well, it's very clear there's a tremendous concern about the pier structures. And I think somebody mentioned on the board that this is not something that you typically encounter, a discussion, detailed discussion of pier capacities. And I'd like to speak a little bit to that because we've heard certainly a lot of information that might cause concern. I'd like to first start off by saying that the company that I work for, STV, has been around for over 100 years. We have been doing major bridge projects throughout the country, and particularly in the Massachusetts area. We are pre-qualified with the state of Massachusetts for all bridge types, including complex bridges, which this certainly is, and movable bridges, and every other type of structure in between. So we have great experience and background to draw on when we look at structures such as the one we're looking at. Our most recent project is the Longfellow Bridge in Boston. We are the designers of record for the rehabilitation of that structure. Among the tasks performed out at that bridge was an evaluation of the old masonry piers that are supported on timber piles, which are masonry clad, and part of the work there was the complete repointing. And when I say repointing, that is the removal of the grout that's been well explained having an issue here at this site, whereby you remove the loose and old grout that's evidently failed, and you replace that grout, and that's the repointing process. And that will happen about above the waterline and below the waterline. And that system has been accepted not only by the state of Massachusetts and the highway department, but also by the Federal Highway Authority, who were who are, I think, 80% sponsors in terms of finances for the Longfellow Bridge. So the processes we used on that bridge will be the similar processes that we apply to this bridge. We appreciate the comments, and I should back up a little bit. There was comments made about lead, and I was assuming you were talking about the issue of lead that came off the old steel superstructure as the paint failed and then the bridge dropped in the water. But all the comments that we've received here today, I think, relate to a different aspect on the lead issue, and that relates to the pier grout. Certainly, some of the grout we expect has lead in the grout, and we're performing tests of the entirety of the piers to identify how extensive that lead contamination might be in the grout. And it was described how the lead caulking is lying on the seabed. Well, what we would propose to do in that regard, we certainly want to remove all failing grout, whether it be lead-based or not. I think that's an important step that we are taking, and re-grouting those masonry joints. But we would also make it a requirement, and it's certainly your prerogative to add this as one of the conditions, that any lead that's seen lying on the seabed, as was shown by one of the officials, that is lead that could be picked up in the process of repointing those joints, just like it's been done on other bridges. There's several other bridges other than Longfellow that we've been involved with where we've had to assess timber piles for reuse relative to current codes. And so this is not something new. There's a screenshot here. There's 4 bridges, and I can read them from here. There's top left is Summer Street Bridge over the 4-point channel, masonry pier structures, very similar to the ones we're talking of. Fore River, we developed the design documents for that design build, and as part of our work on that, we had to assess the timber-supported retaining walls that extend up from both Quincy and Weymouth, and we were able to demonstrate, again, to MassDOT and the Federal Highway Administration satisfaction that those particular piles may be reused. Sometimes when we do an analysis, we find the pier structures cannot be reused. Down in the bottom right-hand corner is the University Ave Bridge in Lowell, Massachusetts, right by the campus of UMass Lowell. In that particular case, we did a complete thorough assessment of that bridge, and we determined that, in fact, it makes sense to replace the bridge in its entirety. Again, on the bottom left is a cable stayed bridge in Fitchburg, Massachusetts. We did a complete assessment of that structure and made a determination that the foundations of the entire structure were not viable for reuse, and the bridge was demolished and we constructed a new bridge. Top left is the Longfellow Bridge, where we found that the bridge could be reused, and the timber piles were good for reuse, and that bridge is just the design and construction has just been completed for a minimum 75 years of life. Similarly, to the right is the Boston University Bridge over the Charles River. We did a complete rehabilitation of that structure. During the course of our work, we found the foundation system was fit to be reused. On the bottom left is the Westfield Great River Bridge out in western Massachusetts. The bridge on the left, there's two bridges you can see, is a bridge that was basically rehabilitated, including the masonry piers and abutments. The bridge on the right is a replica of the structure. And then right again is the Congress Street Bridge, which is right beside the Summer Street Bridge over the 4-point channel. Again, masonry piers, concrete core, full evaluation under the auspices of MassDOT and the Federal Highway Administration, found to be capable of reuse. In many of these projects, we've had to grout the masonry joints, and I can understand the initial reaction of folk who are not doing this on a daily basis, that there's an expectation that you would have to put a cofferdam around. But that is not the practice that we've been using successfully on these structures. These structures, the piers have been replaced without the need of the extensive cofferdam that was being described. That is not our intent. Certainly, if we find something with the bridge that would require a cofferdam, we would have to come and present to you that fact. But that is not what we're finding at this point. And if anything changes, we owe coming to you and presenting that issue, but we are finding that is not the case. A full assessment of these piers has been done, assuming the strengthening process we've just described. And we are finding that the piers are capable of meeting code similar to some of the bridges we're describing here. And like I say, we've been around 100 years. We're not in the business of taking risks because of some motivation outside of good engineering practice. We are a firm that's been around a long time. We've done some of the larger bridge projects in the state, and we intend to be doing those same bridge projects for years to come. So it is not in our interest to be making foolhardy decisions as it relates to this bridge. So I just wanted to make that statement.
How many of these bridges have stop signs and and I asked the council, please, why are we the folks of City of Quincy not allowed to go out there? And that's what I would like to know. He's building this great bridge. What's it going to do for the people of Quincy? Thank you.
I'd like to refer you to the Federal Highway Administration guidance document, and they talk about cofferdams in a situation like this. I also want to point out the tie-in bond several weeks ago, before the City of Boston discussed the need for a structural report to solve this issue once and for all, and that report hasn't been presented. I believe the information you have before you, tie-in bond, ask that for that again.
Appreciate those comments. One of the things that works in this commission, before responding to the actual request, is to ask Sammy Bolsi just to offer 2 points of clarification just around the process that will come up in this.
Thank you. Thanks, Chris. Sorry for all the musical chairs. There are a couple things, and this is really not by way of rebuttal or argument, but just to clarify to make sure that the commission has the best information before it. One of the things that was mentioned during Attorney Shea's presentation is that MEPA isn't a permitting authority. But Chairman, I think you said it best, which is Quincy Conservation Commission is not the final say on this. There are a lot of regulators. The city is not here today to say, this is it, we're stopping here. This is a project, capital P. We understand that there's a lot of regulators, and in fact, we're working with federal, state, and local regulators on this project. So that's exactly right. This is not the final say, and we are doing our due diligence, and we assume that all the regulators will do their due diligence, and we're going to participate through all those processes. And MEPA does that. We're going through the NEPA process as well, so Coast Guard and Department of Army are actively reviewing this project. I know it's been mentioned, it sounds like this needs to go to Department of Army, it sounds like this needs to go to Coast Guard. We are going through those processes. But what MEPA does is it acts as kind of a clearinghouse for all the state regulatory process we need to go to, and what they tell us in the MEPA process is, listen, because of the conditions that exist on this site or aspects of this project, these are the regulators you need to go in front of, and you have to by virtue of this project. So MIPA isn't voluntary, it's not consultative, it's authoritative, we have to follow those rules. And through that process, it's not closed door either between the city of Boston and the officials and the state. There is plenty of opportunities for public comment built into the MIPA process, and then also the other processes that will branch from the MIPA process, whether that be Mass Contingency Plan, Chapter 21E for hazardous materials, Chapter 91 license issues, Division of Marine Fisheries, who I do understand though did submit a letter to the Quincy Conservation Commission recently with respect to this notice of intent having no comments. And so it's important to understand what is MIPA's role and who are the regulators we do plan on going in front of. And then the second thing I just want to quickly bring up, there's been a lot of talk about, well, the City of Boston needs to do an alternatives analysis. And there's been, I think, a bit of a confluence of the different regulatory agencies and the things that they do. I want to bring us back to what Quincy Conservation Commission does, is make sure that this project does not in any way defray from storm damage prevention, doesn't go against flood protection, doesn't create sedimentation, doesn't create erosion. And so going back to those points, under the performance standards of the Wetlands Protection Act, and the regulations that govern wetlands issues in Massachusetts, and presumably that Quincy looks at with respect to its permitting processes, the only requirement to perform an alternatives analysis is only for riverfront projects, which is not one of the areas that we've identified as an area of concern or impact in this project. And so that's why for here, there's no alternatives analysis required. That being said, we're not ignoring that, and we are preparing an alternatives analysis that's required through the MIPA process, and those are all public documents, and there's a public comment period. And so certainly, anybody in Quincy, anybody in Boston, and anyone that is impacted or is related to this project will have an opportunity to comment and review that alternatives analysis.
A little question about that, timing for the alternatives analysis, because we're hearing opponents and proponents saying, oh, the ferry will have more impact than the bridge, or the bridge will have more impact than the ferry, or the impact on the roads, which is within our jurisdiction. Was that analysis, alternatives analysis, something that can be shared with us prior to our decision?
So, and Chief Osgood's going to address the request from the conservation agent. The short answer to that is yes. We are happy to provide that document to you. We are planning on going through the MIPA notice of project change process very soon, and we're happy to share all the components of that application with the commission if that helps you in kind of understanding the project more than what's been put together in the notice of intent today. Thank you.
Thanks, Ed. So just to wrap up here again, thank you so much for the time. We very much want to be responsive to the City of Quincy, the work of Mr. Shea and the entire City of Quincy team has put together, so we will gladly respond to those things which were outlined in that report, essentially treating that like a public records request, responding with the information that we have that may be relevant to this. Second, I do want to reiterate the fact that we are happy to attend any community meeting or community conversation that we are invited to here in Quincy or elsewhere. We want to be able to engage the community and hear the feedback like we've heard tonight. And third, we do accept the request for a continuance, and we've heard from you tonight interest in a peer review around sort of the scope of work which is specific to the Quincy Conservation Commission. We can work on that third-party peer review that is sort of focused on that scope. And then we also heard some requests for your report on the structural integrity of the piers. We can also be able to provide that to you. So we're happy to have a continuance as we put those documents together, and we'll have all that well in advance of the August Quincy Conservation Commission.
And just to quickly, sorry, piggyback off what Chief Osgood said, I just wanted to, in the period, we're fine with the continuance. It sounds like the August date is the next meeting, and so we're fine, and I think we can provide you with everything by that date. So the peer review, there might be a few different interpretations of that. Can we get I guess, what do you want us to provide for the commission through that process? To know that
my sense is the first would be to give the information that is requested, and then if we, in our analysis of it, if we need more assistance, we might have to, I wouldn't call the peer review in until that information is provided. And, you know, we'll rely first on the city consultants, and if necessary, we'll say we need a little bit more time to digest it.
So
Does that
if,
sound appropriate?
just to make sure, so I have that down. So would it be acceptable then that we just, we treat the Teagan bond memo, the bullet points that were provided today, if we just basically answer those bullet points in turn? I think we have documents that are responsive to some of that. Some of them is probably a narrative. If we just answer that kind of line by line with the information, and also, I will say some of that stuff is not relevant to wetlands review, but we'll talk about it, but we'll explain that. Is there anything in addition to what Teagan Bond has in their memo that you would also like to receive from the city or know about?
Can I make a statement here? It's obvious, considering the opposition and the pro and con, that this thing will probably go to the state after it finishes us, regardless of which way we go. But we would like to accumulate as much information as possible on the project, and so that we make an informed decision rather than just, you know, follow public or other people's.
And my bullet points, you know, pretty much match up with, and are supplemented by quite a bit by what Teagan Bond requests. So I think
Nothing in addition to that is.
Yeah, we could use that as the model. I think the only thing that was the community meeting.
Yes.
You know, that's not a requirement of Quincy, but I appreciate your.
Absolutely.
And then the final thing too, I believe it was Councilor Mahoney, she filed a public records request. We did respond to that. I personally assembled it. I admit it was a little late, but they've had that now for a little over a week or so. Would it be helpful to just send all of those documents to you as well?
Yes.
We don't need a separate public records request, but we'll just send them?
Yeah, that is the Teagan Bond
Great.
request.
Who's the best person to send that to then?
You can send it, I'll give you my information.
Yes, our conservation.
Anything else we can give you?
That's it.
Mr. Chairman, the August date is August 1st.
And just one point of clarification to the Commissioner's last point on having the most information possible. We do have peer reviewers who are actually peer reviewing the work of the consultants who presented tonight. We're happy to share that as well.
All right, then we have a vote to continue the hearing to August 1st?
I make a motion to continue the hearing till the next meeting, and request that all the questions be documented and explained to us at the time.
From the Teagan Bond.
From the Teagan Bond.
And second?
I'll second.
So, August 1st. Okay. Is there anything else on the agenda?
Yes, there is
Let's get Maureen back. Maureen, we're not yet adjourned. Come on up.
We have this murder street thing.
But they'll have to, let's make sure that we're
Don't forget my YouTube. Thanks so much. The guy that was just 300 shows. I didn't see here.
Hey, the Patriot Legend cannot say everyone in the city is auditing.
Can you get I was going to have a 300 Shea Boulevard or wherever he lives. Grab his phone when he took off. You know how to get over it?
Well, like I said, he's going to come to the next, he goes
I'll get you
around.
that. I thought.
He said his name.
They all just want I'd like to get as much out in the open ahead of time.
Not to mention that engineers going high like a month ago.
He did not enjoy the
So the woman from Title Bond, she at least she does come up there.
It's the same. same process.
Well, I was like setting it up while you were doing some things at work, so.
With neighbors.
Well, no, the Maritime Board, they didn't have the public meeting.
No, they had it here.
Attention folks, we still have a meeting going on, if you can take it out in the hall, please, thank you.
Okay. Okay, we're still on the record, so.
Yeah, I was gonna.
Where's page 2 of my agenda? Who's got page 2? Here it is. 108 Myrtle Street. Do you have some information on that?
108 Myrtle Street, we are making emergency.
Okay, this was a request for emergency certification for, and Maureen, why don't you address it?
Okay, the person is going to repair, this has to do with the March 2nd storm. So we are issuing an emergency, they're going to do the paving and issues there, and then let us know what's going on.
And then they'll come back before?
Yes, we're just issuing an emergency for now.
Where is this located?
108 Myrtle, that would be the registry building over on Newport Ave. They took on a lot of water in their parking lot and a couple of their walls and issues. They're gonna start repairing and let us know what's going on.
Okay, I make the motion, we issue the, what are they looking for?
It is an
Emergency certification.
Okay, then we have one other matter?
Got a second
This matter
somewhere?
here,
We got it.
this
Jen?
has to do, yeah, Jay's gonna talk about this.
This is the community share?
Yes, yeah. We didn't talk about it.
That was a different one than what we had.
Right, this is 200 across from Fallon.
Yeah, so, this is, famous property?
Yes.
Forgive me, Maureen,
I'm sorry. I got called from the commission to go down and put a stop work order on 200 Commander Shea Boulevard. This is Michael Fain's property. He's been told in the past. He should be letting us know everything he's doing. He did not do that. I did put the stop work order on. There hasn't been an issue since, but we've got him on hold.
Okay, so it's just notice, we don't need to do anything.
Thank you, folks.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Jay?
All right, then,
So
we
we
can
don't
have a
have to
motion.
do anything with that, just waiting to see what he's gonna do next.
It's up to Agnes. We wanted the commission to be aware. I did have just two small
Okay.
housekeeping items. I've had an emergency, and this is kind of quick because we're not meeting in April, and I had one applicant.
July.
I mean, whatever. Okay, we're not meeting in July. So I have the applicant here at 60 Norton Road. It's an emergency replacement repair of a seawall that's collapsed. It's a concrete seawall. They're going to start the work on it. It's actually Mike Clark who's here before you representing on behalf of the city for the Long Island Bridge. It's an emergency repair. He's going to start the work. He'll be back with a notice of intent on the August meeting. Just wanted the commission to be aware.
What's the address?
60 Norton Road.
Norton, okay.
So I'll follow up with the paperwork after. I just wanted the commission to be aware. And there's also one other item which kind of quick. The applicant at 135 Rock Island Road, Bob Kane, he couldn't be here tonight, and I wasn't able to get him to do the advertisement soon enough for tonight. But rather than wait 2 months, I wanted to get the commission's permission that he's going to demo a building, a small house. It should take 1 day. It's going to be done by Jim Dunn, who's familiar with all the regulations. He's done work in the wetlands and coastal areas of coastal Florida. So I would wanted to let the commission know that that's going to take place and just get their okay to go forward with that.
You won't do the construction?
There's no construction. This is just for the demolition of a building.
Right, so it's just demolition.
It would be an RDA ordinarily. I'll follow up with the paperwork at the next meeting on that.
So that's an emergency order also?
It's not an emergency order.
But we're just not gonna have another hearing till
Yeah, we're
August.
not gonna have another hearing. He went to the zoning board. He's gonna knock that down, create some space to put an addition on his home, which is in the front. foreign part. He'll be back with a notice of intent.
So we'll have a notice of intent for any
For that,
construction.
but this is just for the demolition.
And he can include the demolition.
He could, yes,
Yeah,
that's very close.
Yeah.
He lives across the street from me.
Okay.
Hey, John, bring it right on.
I'll see you.
You'll watch it.
Yeah.
You can't do anything other than demo. Okay.
Thank you.
Okay. So we have a motion to adjourn?
Yeah, motion to adjourn.
Second? Second.
All in favor?
So your amendment reduces the environmental impact?
Absolutely.
Didn't the meeting get adjourned, by the way, sorry?
We brought it back.
We had to bring it back, we had an error.
No, but I mean, I'm sorry, but that's just,
Thank you.
okay. Okay, but you could have, I don't
You
know.
put it back on.
I'm just very insulted.
Okay. So this is minimizing the impact?
Yes.
And that'll be the amendment of the order, and this was in compliance with what the DEP had requested?
That's correct.
You can, any comments from the board about this?
No, I feel bad because that other one came out of nowhere, and I'm gonna tell you, John Brennan,
Yeah.
I already walked that one. I did that Boston
2014?
Scientific, yeah.
They're just
And
following
I
their
did it about
compliance.
a year and a half ago.
They're following their
Yeah.
compliance. certificate.
So, I mean, it was all goofy to all of us, okay?
But this is an appropriate amendment.
If
to
it's
reduce
the
the impact.
reduction of
Yes.
the additional, original thing that was approved, that's,
Amendment of order.
Amendment,
condition.
that's
This will
acceptable.
require an open hearing on this, so.
So I can't comment?
Oh, no, you can comment if you'd like.
All right, I'll make it brief,
but-
and,
okay.
and it highlights my frustration at the last meeting that it was, I'm sorry, Eric Salomon, 90 Quincy
Yes,
Shore.
remember you opposed this project, yes.
Yes, so I mean, I oppose this vehemently. It's a half-assed idea that it's a road to nowhere. There's already 2 access points, and the fact that I voiced my loud objection in the April meeting at how much wetlands was being filled in for essentially a useless road. You know, the fact that they came back with, oh, they squeezed out a few less acres, I mean, it can all be mitigated by not filling in the wetlands and using the existing roads. I mean, the core principles of the Wetlands Protection Act is don't fill in the wetlands when there's alternatives, and there's clearly 2 alternatives here already. There's 2 access points to the pier that's in question. And this project, you know, is a giant middle finger to the Wetlands Protection Act. It serves no purpose, and I think it's one of the mayor's, you know, FedEx cloak and dagger deals there to get Commander Shea Boulevard. I don't know the rationale. It makes no sense, you know, from a strategic planning spot, and for the impact of the wetlands, you know, essentially for a FedEx handout makes no sense to me. So.
No, we're still going to do your opposition.
So I appreciate the time.
Okay. But this will minimize it, so I think we're going to.
Can make it 0. All you gotta do is vote no.
Do we have
Vote your conscience.
well, the fact that he's reducing what's already been approved does not have to basically have a hearing.
No, well, we have to approve the amendment to the
Yeah,
order.
we got an override.
Okay, Matt, we can,
Yeah. So is the motion to amend the order?
we'll amend the order, yes.
Second?
Second.
In favor?
Okay. So at least you get part of what you want.
I don't get anything.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Okay.
These guys.
Sorry for the confusion. What do I have here now?
Very confusing.
This is going out, this is, I'm keeping.
Yeah,
Okay, everybody's got to sign before everybody leaves.
I find.
Right now, motion to adjourn, motion to adjourn, because we.
Motion to adjourn.
Second, okay.
Corey, you need this one, so, oh, that
Okay.
emergency.
This was, I've already signed that one, okay?
All right.
And you got all the others? Okay, and I'm also on everyone.
All right, we'll see you guys.
This is no longer.
No, we need to do better.
Couldn't figure out where the heck it was. Okay.
There you go.
I don't even have, it's not, has nothing to do with the project. It's Yeah, but what is it? I've had this sneaky suspicion before and stuff that sometimes more at that, even like the sometimes you guys hang behind. And you know me, I don't trust anybody. You know what I'm saying? But I mean, I know like at the license board, and I write that if you want to open up a pawnbroker license, you don't need a zoning. You just have to get those 3 licenses like that guy on Adams Street got, and Harkness has an attorney, and he got it. You know what I'm saying?
You still need.
Let's leave
No,
this in
but
marijuana.
residential neighborhood.
But they will.
Everyone's open
put
again.
on the agenda.
They were supposed to issue the license.
Yeah, they're supposed to happen very soon.
Yes, today.
Oh, really?
A city can
Get revoked.
move to revoke it,
It's
yeah.
like Robert's rules, unless
I
someone.
remote revoke it
I'm not
any place,
gonna
any place I
too
can.
much now
I
to know
can.
how to fight back and do what like Zane's
Honestly, I don't know anything like that.
I'm getting some disturbing things from my granddaughter
No, boy.
on what they're teaching in
Oh,
school.
really? It's like,
Yeah.
even like the zoning,
Didn't that,
sometimes something will come on.
my grandson's in
later,
second grade, they're
there's a
not even
second,
teaching
there's
them
an
script.
amendment or something, like even like right
writing
now.
in script.
No, what they're telling them now is,
Isn't on.
you're gonna be putting it on
Is that
the
coming out?
computer, and don't worry about spell check's gonna catch it all. And it's probably true, but they should learn.
They should.
It's not coming up anytime soon.
Maybe we're just old fashioned.
Planning board first.
So maybe there's a.
Although I print most of the time now, I don't,
My granddaughter's getting,
I write my signature, but everything else I just print.
Yeah.
I know that for a fact.
she's getting stuff on gays and all that kind of stuff.
Good to go.
Like even in here, it shouldn't be up to me.
How you can decide what your own gender is.
And if I am gonna be recording.
Put that into the
I'm
school
gonna be
system.
recording. I mean, first of all, like, did that guy crowd me in that corner?
The one in the United States is 13.
Isn't even a station anymore. Just like
In the education
Or
system.
whatever, but I'm the Quincy guy, you know that.
More useless class.
All of us. Really? Oh, yeah.
No,
Days and days and days and
It's
days.
I
just a
could
matter
take,
of like.
I got
it
3
goes-
degrees. I could take,
It goes to show.
easily take 2/3 of what I had to learn. Put in garbage can,
Yeah,
just
we're all
gonna
gonna-
use
That,
Oh my God,
a
he's got-
regular.
How bad you are.
They come to the conservation.
Okay,
Open like
my
those-
munchkins.
No, I'm saying at all the things, like the city of Quincy never has a neighborhood meeting when they want to do something, they just do it. They make people do a neighborhood meeting, you know what I'm saying, but it's a matter of.
Good night.
Good night.
Good night, Jay. Good night, John.
How come you were here today anyway?
Oh, you know, just that kind of a girl.
Is she in a Aruba?
Jack of all trades.
Is she in Aruba, is that where she is?
Yeah.
These are all good signs.
Yes, I check.
Oh,